Hi, everyone. So we're doing things a little bit differently this evening. A few nights ago, we had this webcast and we were having all kinds of technical difficulties. So we decided before we put it out to the public, we wanted to retape it. Most importantly, because last time you couldn't really hear or see Monica, and she is kind of the main event for this evening. So we wanted to make sure that you could clearly hear her because she has a lot of information that needs to be delivered to you, the public. So again, welcome to our webcast. We were at max capacity on Thursday, and we're so thankful for you joining us. My name is Brandy Meeks. I'm the Vice President of Operations with And Then There Were None. Over about the next hour, we're going to be discussing some trending topics about the abortion industry and specifically Planned Parenthood. What I especially want you to keep in mind is that we'll be hearing from a past Planned Parenthood contractor, just one, but her experiences are not isolated ones. When you hear what she has to say, please remember that there are workers just like her who have very real stories to share as well, just like our founder and leader, Abby Johnson. In fact, at And Then There Were None, we have helped over 500 workers leave the abortion industry, and they all have stories that are similar to what you're going to hear tonight. So don't allow people to tell you that this is just one person's word against the abortion giants. There are over 500 other people who also have witnessed some of the things that we're going to discuss tonight. So this is the plan. We'll do introductions first, as always, dive into a couple hot topics, and then we'll start answering some questions from you. Please remember, we can't possibly get to them all. I will do my best to make sure that we stay on time and wrap up in the next hour. This is also being recorded, like we talked about earlier, so we're going to make sure that we share that link later for you. That way, if you see something that you want to be able to share with someone else later on, you can share the video with them as well. Now, we're going to be dealing with a very mature topic, so please keep that in mind as you watch this webcast and are around any possible little ears that could be hearing what we're talking about. And I also want to preface our conversation tonight with like we do every other time, with an appeal to any current abortion workers that could be watching this tonight. Please hear my heart when I say that we're here for you. No judgment, just real help at And Then There Were None. We understand that you may have similar reasons for starting work in the clinic, like most of our workers that share, because they want to help, because they want to help women. And that can also be your reason for leaving as well, as it is for many of the workers that come through the ministry. So Monica Cline is here with us this evening. Hello, Monica.
Hi, Brandy, and hi, everybody.
So while working as a sexual health educator at ALGO, Monica Cline was trained by Planned Parenthood to target teens for outreach and volunteered at several of their community events. Later, she worked at the Center for Health Training as the Title X training manager for Texas and New Mexico. Monica was responsible for providing sexual risk reduction education, or sex ed, in the community, and the schools, and in the health centers. Monica left the Center for Health Training because she realized they were simply not committed to giving women options, but their focus was abortion-centered. She felt she could no longer teach teens the way that they wanted her to because the curriculum and style was very vulgar and even pornographic. And she believed the underlying attitude of the anything goes was unhealthy for teenagers. Monica's goals in speaking out go way beyond just being a part of And Then There Were None. She's currently working on developing her own curriculum to educate parents on how to teach their own teens about their bodies and health. Monica says that we all bought that what we were doing was the right thing, that we were working with a population that no one else wanted to reach out to or is difficult to reach. We believed we were the ones doing something good and right. We need a new approach, and an approach that empowers parents to reclaim parenthood and become the primary sex educators for their children. The more we get the info out and stop judging the workers, the more we will get out there and transform our culture and how to truly prevent the hardships that Planned Parenthood pretends to address. So Monica, again, we are so grateful to have you this evening so that we can dive in a little bit deeper into this topic that you've been working in and trying to really raise awareness about for so long.
Thanks, Brandy. Thank you for having me. And Then There Were None has done some amazing things with all of the former abortion workers, and even gracious enough to accept a former comprehensive sex educator into your family. It has been very healing for me. So I'm really, really grateful for And Then There Were None.
Thanks. And we love you, right? We're really grateful to be able to help identify some of the blind spots that we have in the movement and work together to be able to make that happen. So let's jump right in to the trending topic that's on so many minds when we talk about current events and Planned Parenthood right now, and it's Title X funds. So can you please tell us what your experience was with them while you were at or working with Planned Parenthood? And then how did you see them used, and how do you think the changes that have recently been made will affect things?
So, okay, so I guess let's start with just even Title X and some of the changes. I want to really clarify that Title X, since its creation in the 70s, has always said that it is not for abortion services, not for so in other words, I mean, there's a stipulation, a statute within the grant itself that says that you are not to provide abortions. Title X is not supposed to be provided in an abortion clinic. Title X is for pregnancy options. Abortion is not a pregnancy option. So really nothing has changed. What has truly changed is, I think that the American people, we always, talk about wanting our politicians and our government to be held accountable for what they're doing with our taxpayer money. Well, the change now is that we're holding Planned Parenthood, not just Planned Parenthood, but every Title X clinic accountable for how they're using their Title X funds. And when, and the only squeaky wheel is Planned Parenthood. Of all the clinics in the nation that are funded by Title X, only Planned Parenthood has an issue with that. And that's because they're misusing Title X funds. They have been for years. They know it. And now it was going to be found out. So I kind of feel like they're kind of trying to turn it around and play the victim and say, oh, no, you've taken something from us, when in reality is, no, you've been misusing the funds and you're about to be held accountable for that. So they've actually chosen to let go of Title X funds that help, thousands of women in our country. They've chosen to let go of health care for women, reproductive pregnancy option health care for women, because abortion is more important to them. And I know that they tend to use the words pregnant, that abortion is a pregnancy option. It is not a pregnancy option. Pregnancy options are about life, about Title X is all about healthy families, healthy moms, and healthy babies. And abortion is about terminating the life of a baby. So, anyway, I think it's interesting how they're trying to twist everything around to make it sound like somehow there's an injustice being done. But the reality is that they're just one of many clinics in the country that have Title X funding. They're the only ones complaining because they truly have misused, the funds.
Right. So it only makes sense, right? Like if they were going to be held accountable for something and they couldn't really separate the two, right? Then it would make sense that they would want to remove themselves from the situation, right?
That's right.
And in doing so, claiming that they're the victim. But if you look at your experience with them, you can clearly see what is happening behind closed doors. So can you tell us a little bit more about your experience working as a contractor for Planned Parenthood, your sex education experience, all of those sorts of things? Just kind of lay that out for us so that we can better understand kind of what you have been able to see along the way.
Sure. Sex education, you would think, is a simple topic, but it's actually pretty complicated. And most people don't know the various health models used for sex education. So the sex education that we're talking about with Planned Parenthood is something called risk reduction. It's also known as comprehensive sex education, which makes it sound really good. It's actually a secondary health model or health approach. Which means that it doesn't try to eliminate risk, it only tries to reduce the risk. So in other words, these individuals can continue in high risk behavior, and they just give them suggestions on how they can reduce the risk. So my first job in risk reduction, it was with ATTWN, They had a grant to do HIV prevention as well as case management to people living with HIV. So they hired me to be one of their HIV prevention educators, which is, again, risk reduction. So that was my job, was to reach out to women in the community, especially people in high risk areas, meaning any area of our city that had high incidence for HIV infection and STIs. And so this organization, didn't really focus on teenagers, but they knew that that was important. And they knew that I would be collaborating with Planned Parenthood. So they sent me across the street Planned Parenthood was just across the street from our office on 6th Street. And the head of education just had a one-on-one training with me. And she began to explain to me really why it was important to reach out to teenagers. So she began to tell me some of the case studies within the clinic there, just, that she knew of girls coming into the clinic as young as 10 years old. There was injuries to their bodies, foreign objects, just horrific things that, no one at any age should be going through. And it was really horrific to find out that girls as young as 10 were, that they were seeing girls as young as 10 going through this.
Yeah, that's alarming.
It was really alarming. And so my initial reaction was, okay, you've convinced me this is a real problem with teenage girls. And I said, teach me, how do I teach these girls not to have sex? And she smiled at me, she patted me on the knee, and she said, no, dear, we're not going to teach them not to have sex. We're just going to teach them to do it safer. And, a lot of this had to do with just teaching me and indoctrinating me, as well as to say that if we ever tell anyone not to have sex, if we tell them this is a high risk behavior and it's best for you to abstain from that behavior, that was considered shaming and judging. And so she really encouraged me to go to these teenagers, meet them where they're at, not to tell them not to engage in high risk activity, but rather to teach them how to use condoms, lubrication to reduce the friction, get tested for STIs and pregnancy, because they knew that the condoms would eventually fail, or contraception if they were on hormonal contraception, and to basically refer them for the testing, treatment, and abortion. And that's that really sums up risk reduction education and comprehensive sex education. It doesn't it is very much just about prevention. It is just about the different sexual acts and how to reduce the risk of that behavior. So it doesn't take into account a teenager's emotional state, their maturity, their mental state. They don't talk about healthy relationships. If you go to any Planned Parenthood video on YouTube, you'll see that their healthy relationships have more to do with consent. But those consent videos are not actually about the consent that we see like in the law, meaning that you're not supposed to, a minor cannot consent to having sex, in other words, with an adult, or with even at a certain age, they're not allowed to consent to have sex because they're too young. They're not talking about that. The way Planned Parenthood talks about consent, it's purely basically saying yes or no. And it doesn't really take into consideration any, the age of the partner, the situation that they might be in, if there's some kind of social advantage, in other words, a young girl with an older man. It doesn't take that into account. And so that what I noticed with Planned Parenthood over the years of working with them is that they actually felt that young girls were really making the decision. It was their choice to have sex with older men, and they didn't really see that these girls were victims of human trafficking.
Wow. So it's kind of like they just turned this into just a black and white issue, right? Just a yes or no, instead of understanding that there are other complicated pieces to this. So do you think that that's kind of, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but just trying to understand, because I can see your conviction as you talk about the history of you working with them, the things that you've seen, and then the disgust that you have for, especially for the human trafficking piece. And was that kind of your aha moment of, oh my goodness, what am I doing here? Or what did that look like for you where you realized I cannot be a part of this anymore?
You know, it was lots of things. I was a comprehensive sex educator, risk reduction educator for over 10 years. I started with walking the streets, teaching at schools. I did led conferences or workshops all over Texas and New Mexico, Louisiana. And what I really saw was the approach of comprehensive sex education, which I think is really dangerous for our young children, is that I was taught that whenever you walk into a room of whether it's young people or adults, that we are to assume that they've done anything and everything when it comes to sex. So in other words, Brandy, if I were to walk into a sixth grade class, I should assume that because they're going through puberty, that they may have already done many things. And if they're not, it's just a matter of time that they will. And it's my job as a prevention educator to teach them the risks of all these various sexual activities. So even if these young kids haven't been exposed to that, or even if they've heard about it, but they've never actually participated, as an educator, I would actually talk to them about these sexual activities. And I would have to talk to them about these activities in such a way that I was not judging this activity.
So you're
So,
normalizing it.
yes, thank you yeah, that's exactly what happens. So basically, as a sex educator, so if you have comprehensive sex education in your school, what they're doing is that they're normalizing all sexual activity in the teenage years. So that's vaginal, oral, anal sex. It could even mean the use of sex toys, multiple partners. I mean, it could be anything at all. And it's all normalized. And the reason they say that they normalize it is because they don't want the kids to feel judged. So if there's a kid in there who is going to orgies or whatever it may be, or if they're considering, or if they are involved in anal sex, the last thing that the educator is supposed to do, quote unquote, is judge them and say, you know what, that's really not a good behavior. And really, something like that with anal sex is it is incredibly high risk for so many reasons. Just in California alone today, because anal sex has been normalized so much. I was just there a couple of weeks ago. I heard from a clinic that they have an increase in anal injuries in young girls because it's been so normalized, not only through the education, but now it's even got it, it's now in the media. So they're seeing Teen Vogue and 17 talking about anal sex. So, and if you look at the website, anyone watching right now, if you go to a website called The Future of Sex Education, that is a website for comprehensive sex educators. And it really spells out a plan as to how they want comprehensive sex education to be in every school and across the globe. And they say that in that website that they want to normalize adolescent sexual activity. They also go as far as saying that this is a sexual right of adolescents, as if parents are impeding on the rights of their children to protect them from sexual activity at a young age. I mean, it's very twisted. So that, Brandy, was one of the reasons that I was just starting to realize like this is not healthy for kids, especially when I was teaching 13, 14-year-old girls at girls and boys at a particular high school. And as I was starting my HIV prevention class, one of the girls raised her hand and she asked me a question about sexual activity that she was involved in. And she admitted that she didn't like it. It made her gag, and she wanted me to teach her how to do it better. This is one of those moments when I realized that we're really failing our teens. So anyway, she asked me this question and I was really shocked by it. She's admitting that she gags, but instead of saying she didn't want to do it, she was actually asking for me to teach her how to do it better. So I simply said, have you considered just not participating in the sexual activity that you don't like? And those kids were really surprised by my suggestion. And to the point where they actually said, ma'am, no one's ever told us that. No one's ever said that we don't have to have
Wow.
sex. And that really, that really pierced my heart, because it made me realize that comprehensive sex education normalizes sexual activity for teenagers. As soon as they're just getting into puberty, Planned Parenthood and other comprehensive sex educators and other risk reduction educators, their focus is just prevention, prevention, prevention. It's not to delay sexual debut. It's not to keep them healthy through adolescence by avoiding all risky behaviors.
Sexual debut.
Yeah, that's
Ah,
what they call it, a sexual debut. And really the research, Brandy, actually shows that the younger that someone has sex, that one, of course, statistically, they're going to have more sexual partners in a lifetime. That means they're going to be exposed to a lot more risk than someone who starts having sex in their 20s, for example. But also, the research also shows that kids who have sex at a younger age, or they call it a sexual debut, that they suffer from higher rates of depression and suicidal ideation. Polls on teenagers say that they wish they had waited. They
the pressure.
regret. Yeah,
Yeah.
they regret it. Other studies are actually showing as well that they feel that this risk reduction education actually pressures them into having sex, that they feel like that's the expectation. And I
This
saw
is
that
insane. It
over.
feels like pageantry, like you're parading these kids out there for a debut on something. That's just mind blowing to me.
It is. It is. The approach is very unhealthy, and it definitely gives kids the idea that now that you're going through puberty, this is the expectation. They do not, I mean, comprehensive sex educators, risk reduction educators, they think avoiding sex is laughable. They think it's judgmental. They think it's shameful to suggest that. And they also think it's highly unrealistic. So they have a very low expectation, uh, to me, of humanity in general, but definitely a low expectation of our kids. Um, so I was really realizing through working with teenagers that the only reason they were actually sexually active wasn't because, okay, let's also be, okay, so it's not because most of them were sharing that they were sexually active because we expected them to be, not because they were curious about sex, or not because they really wanted to have sex, just because the education normalized it. And to me, that really was just an eye-opening moment, that we were really putting our children at risk. Now, they may not have been my children, but they're someone's children. And regardless, I mean, I have high expectations for my own son, and I want to protect my son, but I want to, I have those same expectations for other kids too.
Of course.
They deserve the same kind of
And,
protection.
and even so, it's going to affect our kids as well, right? Because it affects culture. So even if I think that that's what a lot of people have to understand. And when I hear you speak, I hear you talk about other groups understanding that even if your kids are homeschooled, like we still have to protect our own school districts that we live in, because it's going to affect our kids. Our kids are going to date these kids, right? Like that are being exposed to this, right? Our kids are going to form friendships and bonds with them. And we just really need to be aware of that as we are, like, we're just living life, to understand that we're not, just because our kids aren't in the school district does not isolate us or keep us from being impacted by this.
Sure. And, I think what I've also noticed is that it's perfectly natural and perfectly normal for our teenagers and for their bodies to be changing, for hormones are changing in their bodies. They're, where in maybe fourth or fifth grade, the boys thought girls were gross. Now all of a sudden they're like, wow, girls are different and we like that. So, but it's perfectly normal. It's normal that they have those desires and those curiosities and that attraction. There's not, I mean, it just means that their bodies and their minds are developing just as they were meant to be. And that's nothing to be ashamed of. Sex is nothing to be ashamed of. It's absolutely beautiful, but it needs to be within in the right context. It's safe. Sex can be very dangerous if it's not in a relationship that is monogamous, and where two people are bonding with one another, like in marriage. And I know that if there's anyone from the other side listening to this right now, they're thinking, oh gosh, she's all, why are these people always so about keeping sex in marriage? Well, here's the thing is that on one hand, we can have sex with just anyone or being promiscuous. And it really puts us at risk of disease, HIV, and unplanned pregnancy. But not just that. We're talking about young people who are suffering from depression and suicidal ideation because there's all this bonding going on, and they're truly
Right.
getting hurt by it.
Sure. And let's just go back to that unplanned pregnancy that you just talked about. When you were working with Planned Parenthood, did you ever have, how did the supervisors make you feel when it came to options for unplanned pregnancy? Okay, so Title 10, you're supposed to be neutral, right? So did you get that feeling that they were neutral since you're working in Title 10 with Title 10 staff?
Right. Interesting. So no, they were not neutral at all. As I began to change and as I began to notice that risk reduction was not helping the community. And when I say that, I don't think I could see that it was not helping teenagers and it was not helping the adults in our communities. If anything, risk reduction was truly harming many people in the communities and even to death because of the HIV rates. But what I also, as I started to see that, I started to also realize how much we were pushing abortion. And I myself had scheduled an abortion for my pregnancy. So Brandy, I didn't just teach comprehensive sex education, but I
Wow.
actually lived the same ideology.
Yeah.
So since I lived that same ideology, my first thought when I had an unplanned pregnancy was, you just have an abortion. That's just what you do. So I scheduled the abortion, no big deal. Of course, I had someone intervene. That's another story. And I canceled that abortion and I had my son. So as I continued to work though in family planning, my perspective started to change. I started realizing that, okay, abortion's really not really the only option for a single person, or just because you have an unplanned pregnancy, abortion doesn't have to be the only option. So I began to question it. And I questioned it by just having conversations with other consultants at Center for Health Training. I started questioning my coworkers who have known me since my early 20s. They had mentored me. And I said, do you realize we really push abortion? And they're like, Monica, what are you talking about? I'm like, really? I mean, have you noticed that that's like the only option we ever talk about? They're like, well, yeah, it's the most compassionate choice. I'm like, but not really. I'm like, look at me. I mean, I had my son, y'all love my son. And they're like, well, yeah, but they didn't know why I was changing. Eventually though, I was told, as I was changing, that my supervisor came into a staff meeting and she said, not directly to me, but to everyone at the staff meeting, if you are not pro-choice, you don't belong here. And that just doesn't make sense, because there we were, a organization that was funded, our paychecks were being paid by Title 10 funding, which does not support abortion.
Right.
But yet she was saying that we had to be pro-abortion to even work there.
And that's mind blowing too, because it wasn't a matter of like maybe being passive aggressive about it or maybe just shutting you out of certain conversations. Like, she was clear in the way that she communicated it to you, really.
Well, and when I look back at these organizations, they do believe that abortion is the most compassionate option. It is the only option. They do believe, for whatever reason, that expecting a woman to have a child is cruel and unusual punishment, that it just leads to poverty. And so they basically have this very, very low standards for humanity. So here I was, Hispanic woman, single mother, never married, had a son, was supporting my son, had a full-time job, and took care of him perfectly well, but yet.
And congratulations on that,
Yeah.
by the way.
Well, there's many more women like me. But I just, after a while, I started to feel offended. I'm like, okay, what makes you think that women can't do this?
Exactly.
What makes you think that a minority woman can't do this? Because great majority of the individuals that we were reaching out to were Hispanic and African American. So who has determined that women of color, women like myself, white women, any woman,
Mm-hmm.
is incapable of raising her child and being able to work full time and care for her child and be empowered and just do
Yeah.
amazing things.
That doesn't seem
So,
like a very empowering message, does it, Monica?
no,
Right?
it was not
It's
very
not,
empowering at
it's not
all. It's
possible.
insulting.
Yeah,
It's
it is
insulting.
insulting saying
It's actually
you
insulting.
can't, right? Like
Right.
we want better for you because we know you can't handle it.
Right, right. And to me, it's very much a pat on the hand saying, listen, and I have faced this growing up where someone pats you on the hand and says, well, I understand that you can't handle this because of who you are. I'm like, well, that's not true. That's not true. And if you have friends or family who speak down to you that way, you need to find new friends.
New friends, new family. Yeah,
And
new relationships for sure.
Right, new relationships, definitely. But that's how I view comprehensive sex education now. It is really setting the bar very low for our young people and adults. But not just that, it is not helping. Now, the CDC, Brandy, has their latest STD data out, and the latest data is from 2017, and it shows that individuals ages 15 to 25 are disproportionately impacted by STIs and HIV. I mean, they are only 27% of our population in this country, but yet they account for 50% of the STI and HIV infections in the country. That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've heard Planned Parenthood say, talking about abstinence is the reason that this is happening. But the truth is that HIV and STD risk reduction education has been going on since the early 90s, late maybe even the late 80s. I don't remember exactly. And that has been the education that has been going into the communities over and over and over again. But yet we still see the STIs and the HIV really high. So it's not the fault of avoiding sex. It's actually the fault of comprehensive sex education, that condoms will fail, that people don't always use condoms as much as you want to believe that your risk reduction program might change that behavior. And we see that because we see the rates that are evident. I mean, we see it there at the CDC. So we know that it's not working.
Right. So it's becoming increasingly clear, especially as we have this conversation as well, that there are certain groups that can't be trusted to be able to deliver this information to our kids, right? So as parents, number one, my first question is, how does Planned Parenthood view parents, right? And then follow it up with, what can we do about it?
So Planned Parenthood, so I've been collaborating with Planned Parenthood since the 90s. Have volunteered for them, and then was their Title X training manager for several years. And over all those years, one thing has always been very evident. They believe that parents are a barrier to service. So what I hear from clinicians and from staff at the
Do they use
clinic,
those words? Do they use those words? Just out of curiosity.
that is, yeah. I mean, just as, so in Title X and in risk reduction, we have, like, when I said sexual debut, we have all this jargon that we know. Well, that's part of the jargon. Parents are a barrier to service.
Good to know.
Parents are a barrier to service.
And
the reason they say that is because they have said, and I remember just, training them, and hearing the nurses say this, like, oh, as soon as a parent finds out that their kid is coming to Planned Parenthood for services, we'll never see that kid again, because the parents don't want them coming to our clinic. So they will go to any means to ensure that parents don't know that the kids are accessing services at Planned Parenthood. So whether it's changing your name to some other name, or giving a phone number to a friend, of a friend, instead of Planned Parenthood calling.
I don't know about you, but I've always been taught that if you ever have to do anything in secret, perhaps you shouldn't be doing it. Right.
Right.
And that's what they're encouraging, is this secret from the parents. It's heartbreaking to me.
I've made that point several times in some of my talks as well, Brandy, that, we teach as parents, we teach our kids that if anyone tells you to keep a secret, know that that's not right. If anyone tells you to not come to mom and dad about something and they're trying to get you to hide something from mom and dad, know that that's a red flag and they're not trying to care for you. They're actually trying to harm you. And so I really encourage parents to teach their children and remind them that they are their children's greatest advocate. When kids come to you with questions about sex or whether they actually became sexually active or they just have questions, I always encourage parents, it's so important for you not to get angry. It's so important for you to start considering these things today, knowing what you want to say. What are your values? What are your expectations for your children? And start teaching them that. Have those conversations with them. Let them know that whatever question they have, they can come to you to ask, and that you promise you will not get angry with them. One of the things I told my son is like, listen, you might come home and ask me a question that I'm going to be absolutely shocked about. Like, what? I can't believe, and just know that even if I react like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you asked me that, just know that that was just an initial reaction, and trust that I'm going to calm myself down. And then I'm going to say, all right, let's talk about it. Tell me more about that. And he understood that. And we were able to have really good conversations about that. But the truth is that Planned Parenthood knows that they need to keep parents out of the picture to continue having access to their children. The only good parent to a Planned Parenthood is a parent who agrees with their ideology, which is that kids are going to have sex, and that they should be supported in having sex, and that they should be able to have access to condoms and birth control, whether the parent knows it or not. And I really want to emphasize to parents how important it is that you do not decide to turn around and give your back to your children because you find out they're sexually active. That's the last thing you want to do, because those kids, it's not, if you think that the kids are sexually active and that everything's fine and okay emotionally and physically, then you've deceived yourself. They really need parents there to help them, and to really help them navigate this time of their life, and really to advocate for avoiding all high risk activity.
Yeah, that makes sense. So tell me this, as not trying to be devil's advocate here, but you're talking about parents that can be informed and involved, but what do we do for the kids that don't necessarily have parents that are plugged in, or that are
Checked out.
parenting well? Yeah, that are checked out. Exactly. Like, how do we help them, and how do we prevent them from falling into the hands of
I
Planned
agree. I've thought about that a lot. And well, number one, a big part of the group that, or the organization that I'm starting, or the things that I'm doing, is really educating parents so that they're not checked out.
Excellent. Can you tell me more about that, about your group?
There's two things.
Yeah.
So I really want to teach parents, how important it is not to check out. I think a lot of times our teenagers give us the impression that we're the last people that they want to speak to, and it's actually not true. Even the studies and polls of teens say that what their parents think and the influence of their parents is greater than any other influence out there, whether it's peers or media. They truly want to know the heart of their parents and what our expectations are for them. It means a lot to them. They want us to be leaders. Many parents, though, say, well, I don't feel equipped to be able to talk about these subjects. And that's something that I keep myself open to. I'm trying to create some resources so that people can have access to books and videos so that they can get that information. But also they can, email me anytime, and I would love to have a conversation with them. So as my organization grows, there'll be more services available to parents for that. But the other question that you had is, well, how about those kids whose parents have checked out and there is no reaching the parent? The parent just refuses to be a parent. What do we do for those kids? I'm not a big fan of sex education in school at all. I really think that sex is not about just the act. but that it has a lot to do with values and morals, our humanity. And that is something that belongs to a family. A parent should be teaching their children that. But for children who don't have access to parents who would teach them those things, I think that it is important that we have other role models that can help them. I also believe that if we're going to have any kind of sex ed in the school, it should be sexual risk avoidance. Many of the sexual risk avoidance curriculum and staff and organizations that I've seen going into schools are amazing. They use their own lives, their own marriages as examples to the kids. They're not. They're of a. I also like that they choose educators that are within a certain age range that the kids can really relate to, whether it's
Right.
their 20s or early 30s. My son, actually, his school had a sexual risk avoidance curriculum. And I knew the organization that put it on. I knew the people. So I was totally okay with my son going to those courses. So I chose not to opt him out. And I was really surprised because it was a male educator, and my son loved that it was a male educator. And he loved to hear from this male educator about how he dated, how he viewed, girls at that age, how he views his wife today, his expectations for the young men in the class, and to be gentlemen, and really
Respect.
gave them this sense
Fantastic.
respect. And it wasn't just, okay, it's important to say respect girls, but he was able to speak to them on a man level, on a manly level, that made them feel prideful about being masculine and their role of being a gentleman to girls, regardless of whether the girl respected herself or not.
Mm.
And that's really important too, is that we have a lot of young girls whose parents have checked out, and they're actually thinking that that's the only way they can get affection from boys or attention from boys, is to be sexually active. And so a lot of the teaching in sexual risk avoidance is really to respect one another. Even if someone is coming on kind of hard and asking for sex, that you're able to show them respect and say, you know what, I'd love to take you to a movie, or I'd like you to have lunch with me at school, and do alternative things. So I think parents, if there is any sex education in your school, I would say join your school board, join the group at your school district that makes decisions on what kind of health care or health curriculum you have in your school. Join that and ask them and tell them that you want sexual risk avoidance and not sexual risk reduction. I think that's really important. And I think that might be the only way that we can reach some of those kids who you were referring to, that if their parents have checked out, at least they're getting good information at the school.
Love that. And just so we can make sure that we're following you on social media, your organization is called It Takes a Family.
Yes.
And if we want to email you, how can someone email you? What's your email address?
You can email me at hello@monicacline.com.
Excellent.
My website, ittakesafamily.org, is not up and running just yet, but it should be in a couple of months. Actually, by November 1st, we should definitely have, I think it should have a launch by end of October. But for now, they can go to monicacline.com. They can email me at hello@monicacline.com. And I would be happy to, I think what is more effective, Brandy, is when they can invite me to come into their community.
Okay.
So I've had churches invite me. I've had organizations of just, different parents or school boards, whatever it may be, invite me into their community to talk to the parents about sexual risk avoidance and how they can talk to their children about sex in a way that honors them.
Fantastic. Well, and also you can follow our social media as well And Then There Were None. We're going to be able to help promote Monica's stuff as it rolls out. So if you follow us, she's also our Quitter of the Month for September. So we're going to have, all kinds of information linked up to her new website when it comes out, also her social media pages. So if you follow us, we'll make sure we point you in the right direction. So our time is actually getting close, but Monica, I wanted to talk with you and just ask you if there's anything else that you wanted to close with, or anything else that you would really want people to know or understand, or to give them hope in any way about some of the stuff that they're facing just if you had any closing thoughts on that.
I think the greatest hope that I can give parents is um, that you really are the most powerful influence in your children's lives. So much so that even Planned Parenthood knows that you're incredibly powerful. And that's why they don't want you involved, because they know that if you're involved in your child's life, especially in their sex life, instilling your values in them, protecting them, being the leader that you are in their lives, that it is going to greatly impact them. So family connectedness is key to ensuring that your children are healthy, not only in their going through puberty and sex, but also, as well as academically, just in every area of their life. So I just really encourage you that even if you get the eye roll, the famous eye roll, Brandy, have
What's
you gotten
that?
eye roll
What's
from your
that?
kids? You'd never say, I think every parent has, if you're doing something, if you're disciplining your kids and setting limits, you've gotten the eye roll.
Right. The
And
look, for sure.
I love to tell parents, embrace the eye roll. If you've gotten the eye roll, you've done something right. Like that's awesome. So, but the truth is that whether you get an eye roll or you say, oh, come on, mom, or come on, dad, they love that you're having that conversation with them. They love that you care enough to ask a question or to just say something inspiring into their lives. They love that. And it makes them know and feel that you really care and that you're there for them. And so just keep doing it, keep pressing on. They really need you. We parents need to continue to lead in their families' lives.
I love that. I love that so much, because it does give us so much hope that we do need to stand in the gap, and we need to stick it out, even if it feels a little uncomfortable for us sometimes. So I'm really thankful for resources like yours and what's going to be developed, because I think it's going to help give us speaking points of how we can communicate better with our kids on these issues. And again, if we draw back, someone else is going to step in, and it may not be the message that we want delivered to them. So we do need to be very mindful of that. So thank you. Yeah, thank you again for joining us. And I just want to remind everyone again that's watching this, if we have any past abortion workers, current abortion workers, and this is abortion industry, right? This is not just, you see Monica worked in a very different capacity maybe than what you might traditionally think of as working in the abortion industry, right? Because she wasn't actually employed by Planned Parenthood, and she was working on Title X stuff within sex education, but they're very much connected. But I just want to, again, inspire you and give you hope that the same thing that led you in can be what leads you out, wanting to help women. And so we're just so thankful for Monica's courage in joining us tonight, and the courage of future workers who will leave as well. And again, we're so thankful that we have the opportunity to work with former abortion industry workers. We also want to just put out a call that if you're sitting there tonight and you feel compelled to help us rescue more workers from the abortion industry, you can make a gift to our organization by going to abortionworker.com and clicking on the donate tab. And finally, if you'd like to stay connected with us, with our organization, and get text from Abby, you can text NONE, N-O-N-E, to 53445. And again, that is the word NONE, N-O-N-E, to 53445. And we usually send out a text a couple times a month, no more than that, but and usually they're from Abby, which is a really big blessing for people to be able to get that connection with her. So again, text NONE, N-O-N-E, to 53445. And just can't thank you all enough for joining us this evening, and we hope to see you again very soon. Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.